All right, and we're live. Welcome to Talent Take Five. I'm so thrilled to welcome renowned speaker, multi-time author, Mike Robbins to the show. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Andrew, I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, as we were just chatting, I met Mike first in 2018, coming off of the heels of your book, which I have kept on the handy bookshelf behind me, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, which I
Nice.
reference all the time. And man, has a lot gone on. I know you wrote a book during COVID and excited to hear your perspectives on the landscape in the market now and looking at high performing cultures and teams as a thought leader in the space. So thank you so much again. So Mike, I mean, for those that don't know, your story is really interesting, going from living the dream at one point, right? So for the audience, if they don't know a little bit about that story, can you explain your background as an athlete and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I grew up in California where I still live, and I played baseball all growing up. I actually got drafted out of high school by the Yankees, which I imagine, Andrew, you being from the Boston area, you're probably not a Yankee fan. Um,
No, but we'll give it a
yeah,
pass.
I mean, you'll be happy. I didn't actually sign with the Yankees because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford, which is about an hour from where I grew up in Oakland. So I go to Stanford, got my education, got a chance to pitch in the College World Series, which was fun. Then I got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals, and I did sign a pro contract at that time. And the way that it works in professional baseball here in North America, as many people who are listening to or watching us may know, you get drafted by a major league team, whether it's the Yankees or the Royals or the Red Sox or the Cubs or any of the teams in the major leagues. You got to go into the minor leagues, and there's a bunch of levels you got to kind of work your way up through. Unfortunately for me, I was still in the minor leagues 3 years in. Went out to pitch one night, threw one pitch toward ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. I was 23 years old at the time. I had started playing baseball when I was 7. 2 years, 3 surgeries later, I was forced to retire from baseball. And, that was a pretty hard transition for me because I didn't really, I mean, I'd gotten an education. It wasn't like I'd never thought of anything else besides baseball, but didn't really know what the heck I was going to do if I wasn't a baseball player. So that was quite a journey. I ended up working, it was the late 90s when I got hurt. I got a job in sales and business development for an internet company. Did that for a couple years until the dot-com bubble burst. And then I lost my job and was like, oh gosh, now what? But had a mentor ask me, this is, 25 years ago, it was the summer of 2000. He said, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, anything? And he said, yeah. And I was like, well, I think I would write and speak and try to inspire people with anything that I've learned or anything that I think, might inspire them. And he was like, okay, well, you should do that now. And I was like, now? I was 26 years old and there was no YouTube, there was no podcast, there was no, blogs or anything in those days. It was just like write books and articles and give speeches. But I decided to start a business doing that at the beginning of 2001. And all these years later, I've been writing books and giving speeches and working with leaders and teams for the last 2.5 decades.
It's a phenomenal story and one of resiliency and pivot and reinventing yourself. And I'm really curious how you're positioning, this constant pivot with a new landscape in this market, sort of if we can call it post COVID. But what's
Yeah.
going on for you right now? What's happening in your world?
Well, look, a lot's happened since you and I met back in 2018. And just for all of us in the last several years, I mean, I'm fortunate in that a lot of our clients, I live out here in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area. So a lot happening with technology and AI, but so much disruption and change for all of us just in terms of how we work and where we work and when we work and the technology platforms that we're on. So a lot of my work focuses around authentic leadership and really building strong high performing teams. And although the landscape has changed a lot, and so some of the dynamics that are at play today are very different than they were a year ago, 5 years ago, obviously before COVID, but even coming through the pandemic, it still to me fundamentally comes down to how do we build authentic relationships with each other, and how do we create environments where people feel like they can really show up and bring their whole selves to work.
It's a good place for us to kick this off. In the spirit of Talent Take Five, five hot takes on what we're dealing with in today's business environment. Hot take number one: the trust paradox. Most leaders are living in a fantasy land. So let's start with a quick reality check here. And I think this might make some executives uncomfortable. There was a 2024 study done, the Edelman's Trust Barometer showed only 58% of people trust their bosses. And that's lower than stranger level of trust. So why are leaders struggling with trust in their organizations today?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think number one, I think most leaders, if you talk to them, assume, unfortunately, sometimes according to that study, erroneously, that there's more trust built in than there actually
Mm,
is. Um,
yep.
Now, that's not always the case, but I think a lot of leaders will over assume, hey, I think my people trust me, but don't really know. And the second part of it is it's hard if you don't trust your boss, if you don't trust your manager, you're not usually going to walk in and say, hey, I don't trust you. Right. So it
Right.
becomes this weird conundrum. And employees also have a certain level of responsibility in this, not to take the bosses and the managers off the hook, but it's like, okay, it's a two-way street. We got to be communicating. And I think the third component of it is that just we're together less than ever these days. We're moving faster. We're connecting on email and Slack and text and Teams and Zoom and all the things. Great technology, just harder to build rapport and trust and really sort of deeper connections. So I think all of those things factor into it.
What should and this is sort of a sidebar. I was just reading today that since COVID, we're now at pre-COVID levels of employees being back in the office. And there's been a lot of tension, in my work in search, in recruiting, the work-life balance and having flexibility is always very high on the list as far as things
Yep.
that people are looking for in roles. And it seems like are a lot of executives trying to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube, having trusted the employee population to do their jobs with substantial flexibility. And then we're kind of in this clawback position now. What's your take on that?
Look, I think it's tricky. Out here in the Bay Area where I live in with a lot of tech companies, there's still quite a bit of work from home, work hybridly, work remotely. And the tricky part, and you know this better than I do, that in the talent world, like competing for talent, it's like it's a huge factor for people with young kids, for people at different stages of life wanting that flexibility. I think what I see anecdotally, and I think there is some research that backs this up, that on a human level, on a personal level, there's a ton of benefit to being able to work remotely, work from home, right? Hey, I can walk the dog, I can pick up the kids from school, I can, the guy that the plumber comes over. I mean, all the things, right? I can run errands, all that stuff. I can wear my sweats, I don't have to commute.
Right, right. Of course.
However, from a trust perspective, from a culture perspective, from a connecting with the people that we're working with perspective, there's some real downside, even from a mental health perspective. I think of young people who, right, especially those people who graduated from college during COVID and like had to work from home. And like, it's for me, when I was young, that was my social life, was being after baseball and
Totally.
once I was working. So again, there's a lot of factors. So there's pros and cons. And I think the best leaders that I see these days and the best companies are trying to, as effectively as possible, and they're never going to please everybody, but as effectively as possible, empower their leaders to figure out what actually works for the teams within the company, the type of work they're doing, where people are physically located, what needs to be done. Because the reality is there's some businesses where it's actually essential that everyone's pretty much in the office every day. And there's other businesses where actually it's not essential at all.
Right.
And then it becomes more of a preference thing. And then we have to just constantly paying attention to how are people doing? How are people engaged and how are they performing? And like, there are companies even before COVID that were completely distributed and functioning very well. So that's a possibility. There also were companies where everyone was in the office every single day and people hated each other and didn't trust each other. So
Right.
that's no guarantee. So you got to really, it's not a one size fits all. You got to kind of customize it for your team and your company and then do the best you can to really take the temperature of everybody and see what's working and what's not working.
Mike, how are executives figuring out they have some trust issues internally with their team?
I mean, look, it's a hard one. Like we were talking about, sometimes you don't really get that feedback personally, anecdotally. Surveys can help, and you see, oh, geez, people aren't engaged or the trust level's low,
Yeah.
depending on the sophistication of the survey. Once you see that data or get that feedback, then there's still the $1 million questions like, what do we do about this?
Right.
I mean, I do get called in. It's like, hey, our engagement scores were lower. People don't seem like there's a lot of trust or collaboration, or like we're struggling with some of these soft skills. And to me, again, like it's not a one size fits all. There's not a like, oh, just do this and everyone will trust each other. I really think it is kind of trying to get up underneath, talking to people, creating enough safety and openness that people can speak up, hopefully, so you can find out like what's getting in the way of the trust. I mean, a lot of my work, Andrew, as you know, focuses on authenticity. And authenticity, the way that I define it and describe it in my work, is really about being honest, but removing self-righteousness and adding vulnerability. And so a lot of times trust gets broken down inside of organizations, sometimes because of structure and hierarchy and dynamics and where people are located and cultural stuff. But oftentimes on an interpersonal level, it's hard to build trust with someone if there's quite a bit of self-righteousness coming from them towards us.
So true.
And the thing that unlocks and opens up more trust in our human relationships with each other, any relationship, whether it's at work or outside of work, is vulnerability. And so a willingness to be vulnerable. I mean, even to the point, as awkward as it might seem, having conversations with the people on your team or the people in your company to some degree about like, hey, what can we do? What can I do to build more trust with you? Right. Or I don't know exactly how to do that. I mean, we all think we're trustworthy people and we communicate and operate in ways that should elicit trust from others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the other people's experience. And if we really want that to be the case, we sometimes have to ask questions that might be hard to hear the answers to, but are important to know.
I love your formula around authenticity. What how about for some of these executives that might be unhappy in their roles, yet because of uncertainty, and this is something that we see all the time in my world, is
Yeah.
them staying because of uncertainty that they're going to find a better job, right? And what advice would you give to that leader that might be feeling that way and they're responsible for setting the direction and others are looking to them for that?
It's tricky. We all have to navigate our lives and our responsibilities and pay our bills and support our families. So like, yes, would it be great if in an ideal world everybody loved their job and was happy with what they were doing? And look, right now there's a lot of fear in the marketplace. I mean, you know this again better than I do. From what I understand, generally speaking, the job market has still remained relatively good, but in
Yes.
certain sectors and with all of the disruption and financial instability and what's coming next and AI and how's that going to disrupt all these different industries. Like people, there's fear out there that everyone's like, there's been this looming recession for several years now that hasn't quite come, thank goodness. But so there's a lot of unknowns. And so there are people understandably feeling scared and like, hey, I better just stay here and be grateful that I have this job, even if I'm not super happy. The
Right.
thing though, the more senior you are and or the more unhappy you are, the less effective you're going to be in leading other people if you're not really engaged,
Great point.
right? I mean, again, it's like I often say, I mean, years ago, I used to coach a lot of people with public speaking, with presentations, and I would say to them, I'd stop them in the middle if I was coaching them. I would say, you don't seem that interested in what you're talking about, right? And it would be they're nervous or that was complicated or whatever. And I would say to them, look, you're the ceiling. You're giving this presentation. We can only be as excited as you are. Now, we're not going to all necessarily be as excited as you are, but if
Right.
you're bored with what you're talking about, we're definitely going to be bored. And so if you're a leader and you're trying to engage people or motivate people or inspire people, it doesn't mean you have to be in a good mood 24/7, but like if you're not happy with your job or you're upset with the direction of the company or the strategy, or you think your senior leaders are idiots or whatever, even if you're a pretty good actor or you've got a good poker face, like that's going to impact the people around you ultimately. It's hard to fake that stuff.
Hot take number 2 is that vulnerability is really the ultimate performance hack. Qualtrics had a survey as well that vulnerable leaders saw 25% higher engagement, and they were twice as likely to exceed financial targets. Is vulnerability actually the secret performance weapon that most executives are too scared to use and go there themselves?
I think so. I think it's a huge differentiator. I mean, I think of, Brene Brown, who's been studying vulnerability for a couple decades and has helped mainstream a lot of the concepts around it that are important based on her research from the University of Houston. I love her definition of vulnerability. She says vulnerability is risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. And so think about being able to embrace risk, emotional exposure, and
True.
uncertainty. Now, all three of those things by their nature are a bit uncomfortable, right? I don't particularly love risk. I definitely don't love uncertainty, but they're part of life. They're part of leadership. Emotional exposure. Now, I happen to be someone who's relatively comfortable being emotionally exposed. Some people are less so. But even if I emotionally expose myself, Andrew, to you, you could use it against me. You could judge me, laugh at
Totally.
me, tell someone. There's so it's all of it's risky. However, we often think of vulnerability as, we sort of ineffectively, inappropriately think of it as weakness. It's not.
Mm,
It is a risk, though. It is, right? And if you think about vulnerability, it's so tied to courage. So people who are willing to say, I don't know that, or I screwed that up, or I need some help, get more advice, get more support. People who are willing to take risks and say, I'll try, I'll go for it. Not a guarantee they're going to succeed, but right. So if you think about it, like I was doing a workshop at Google years ago and I was talking about vulnerability, and a woman in the workshop raised her hand and she said, I'd never thought about vulnerability in this context. This was probably a decade or so ago. And she said, and it just clicked for me. She's like, there's another woman who works here at Google. We grew up in the same town. We went to the same high school. We weren't super good friends, but we're the exact same age, from the same place. We've stayed in touch over the years. We both work here. We've done a few other things in our career. But she's way more successful than I am. She's just
yeah,
further on. And she goes, and if I look at it, we've known her since we were kids. She's always been willing to take risks. She's always been willing to raise her hand and try to do stuff, even if she didn't know she would succeed. And she's like, I think that's why she's been so much more successful than me. And I appreciated, again, the vulnerability of this woman saying this to a group of her colleagues in this room. And all of us kind of were nodding, like, yeah, we all know someone
totally.
who, if we're being really honest, it's like they're not necessarily 10 times smarter than me. They just had more courage. They just went for it when I wasn't willing to. And that's a function of being able to embrace vulnerability.
I'm sure you feel that too, right? It could have been in the big game in
Yep.
game 7, and it wasn't because you weren't capable, it was because of things outside of your control, and that's a tough thing, right?
I think so. I think we compare other people's outsides to our insides and it doesn't match up. We look at people and go, well, that person seems really smart or confident or capable, or
Right.
they have more supportive family members, or they grew up, there's always but in reality, like, again, some people have better situations than others. Clearly, some people are blessed with God-given abilities that some of us aren't. But in general, when push comes to shove, it usually comes down to that moment of, do I have the courage to actually do this thing? Right. And like in your work, it's like, do I show up at the interview and represent myself well? Do I ask for the job, or do I ask for the sale?
Right.
Do I go for the thing? Do I leave the job that's comfortable and I'm doing well at and successful, but I'm not really happy? This morning I was listening to a podcast and someone quoted, I forget if it was Rumi or somebody, basically said, I'd rather fail living true to myself than succeed living someone else's life.
Totally.
And to me, that really resonated around authenticity. It's like, I don't want to fail, but at the same time, I'd rather be going for something that I really want than actually succeeding at something that I don't really care about, which I think, sadly, a lot of us find ourselves in those situations because we have responsibilities and life is expensive. We have people paying, counting on us. So I get it. But if we can move in the direction where we really want, we're more likely to want to take risks and we're more likely to be successful.
Quiet quitting was the big
Right.
phrase maybe 2 years ago, but now there's this idea of quiet cracking. It's very related to what we're talking about, is sort of this silent struggle that people are
Yeah.
having, that prevents people from going to that next level and maybe overcoming the challenge that they're having and preventing themselves from getting vulnerable to overcome those obstacles. So I don't know if you've heard that
Yeah. I haven't
concept
specifically, but
yet.
it makes sense. And I do think, look, Andrew, I mean, I think the last 5, 6 years, if we just think back to like the beginning of the pandemic to where we are now. Now, clearly in my world, I feel like things are better. There's more normalcy to life, even though it's still very
So
different
agree.
than it was.
Yep.
However, I'm not sure that we've really recovered individually, collectively. I think it's just been a constant, we came out of COVID and kind of went right into this weird, inflation was high and the economy got weird. And again, we thought a recession was coming and what's happening, and people panicked. And then we rolled into an election that was really tumultuous, and then like a new, administration and cuts here and this happening and AI and disruption and oh, the world's going to change in ways we can't even imagine. It's like, hasn't it just changed more than we could imagine the last, like, what's happening? Almost everywhere I go, people are exhausted, they're weary. And we can't point to, like, we're not in the middle of lockdown where we could all point to, like, this is weird. We're sort of in this world where it seems like everything should be normal and we should be feeling good. But I don't know too many people that are right now, quite frankly.
Your book you wrote, "We're all in this together," right? Does it feel like we're still all in this together? Because I talk to a lot of people that are unhappy at work. They would
Yeah,
like to make a change, some that have to make a change because they were laid off or a company was bought, whatever it might be. And people are really stressed and feeling like they
yeah,
have to fend for themselves. So
totally.
are we still in this together?
Well, it's interesting. I actually finished writing that book right before COVID. So I finished the manuscript the end of 2019. The book came out in the spring of 2020, right as we were in the throes of the pandemic. And a lot of people, again, were using that phrase. And that phrase to me has always been kind of a battle cry for teams, like teams that win, teams that really focus on culture is like, hey, we're in this together. Let's really work to get rid of the us versus them language and mentality because it's like, wait, the left hand's fighting with the right hand. This department's fighting with that department. People are getting internally competitive. It comes from all those years, Andrew, playing baseball when it's like the teams that I was on that were really negatively internally competitive. It was hard for us to succeed. We often would underperform when everybody was sort of out for themselves. And when we could somehow figure out this really difficult but really beautiful thing when all of a sudden we actually were invested in each other's success. We were rooting for each other,
Totally.
even if our own little egos would get kind of bent out of shape sometimes when someone else was doing really well. There was something exciting about it, and it just made everybody play better. And then I started to see that in my work over the last couple decades working with teams. So, and then moving into COVID, it was like the paradox was like we were all stuck at home and separated, but we were kind of collectively in this storm together that was weirdly a way that could bond us. Although sadly, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think over these last couple of years, there's a lot of divisiveness, there's a
Mhm.
lot of fear, there's a lot of scarcity, right. And it does feel like right now this sense of like, oh my gosh, everything's so expensive. AI is going to take away all these things. Like
Absolutely.
there's going to be winners and losers. Like I don't want to be on the losing side. And there's kind of this everyone for themselves mentality collectively that does deeply concern me. And I think for the leaders and people listening to us and watching us who have teams and manage people and are interested in the culture of not only their teams but their communities, like that everyone for themselves mentality, that go get yours and who cares about everyone else, it's an understandable human instinct. It's just not healthy and sustainable, and it's not going to bring us together and have us collectively succeed.
I'm always a big sports analogy guy myself. And I think about it feels so much better to win as an individual and like have your own individual success when the team's winning. I mean, who really
Yes.
cares? Like, who cares about being the leading scorer on a team that doesn't make the playoffs or losing,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
so much more rewarding when you
Yeah.
are collectively winning as a group.
Absolutely.
And I think that, that's kind of the hot take three that, it's quiet cracking is this sort of talent crisis that no one is talking about. A lot of these high performers are struggling to get to that vulnerability that we're talking about. And I think it's bubbling over when they feel like the team isn't winning anymore.
Right. Yeah, I mean that look, there is some reality to that. To your point, you can be doing well individually, but if the team's not succeeding, whether we're talking sports or business, it's hard to feel really good about it or to be enjoying it collectively. I mean, it's kind of like, look, just on a human level, if you have a group of friends and things are going really well in your life, but your friends are all struggling, I mean, it's hard because it's like, or again, you and your spouse, things are going really well, and you have a friend who's getting divorced. It's not that we can't be friends. We can totally be friends. We can support each other. It's just more challenging when the collective people around us are struggling or the company's struggling or there's a lot of uncertainty or business is down or I have a client CEO that I'm coaching for a winery. Like the wine industry is down as an industry right now. And like this company is doing better than the industry, but they're still down overall, sort of year over year. That doesn't feel very good. It's like, hey, we're doing less bad than others. It's like
Yes.
hard to get excited about that, right? Again, it's like a sports team. It's like last year we were, baseball team, we were 30 games under 500. This year we're only 10 games under
Right,
500.
right.
That's an improvement, but you're still like, yeah, but we're still not very good.
Such a good point.
You know,
How should you approach being in a position where you can pivot easily no matter what happens? Because I mean, you dealt with this too, doing a massive career pivot, going from baseball to public speaking, not even public speaking, first into sales, right? What's the right way, like in the present moment, to stay ready for a pivot, and advice that you would give to somebody that's dealing with any of those types of problems?
I mean, look, I think we can overdo it in planning for the future or worrying about future scenarios. And I'm not, look, there's some level of planning for the future that's important for all of us, right? But, financially, health wise, family wise, otherwise, career wise, where do I want to be? And I'm a big goal setter in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. However, I also think we have to have some level of humility to realize we have no idea what's coming. Right. If the last 5 or 6 years have taught us nothing, it's that like we don't know what's coming next.
Right.
And as scary as that can be, I think it's important to acknowledge the fear of that. I don't particularly love that. That kind of can sometimes I can wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, like we have a 19-year-old and an almost 17-year-old. And I'm like, what's the world going to look like in 5 years, 10
Totally.
years, 20 years for them? Right. However, I feel like right now is a time for us to both stay really open minded with as much of a growth mindset as possible. So, like, are we learning about things like AI and other
Yeah.
things that are happening? And at the same time, I feel like, again, and I'm biased in this regard, but I feel like investing in the prioritization of human connection.
Mm.
Like, as far as I can tell, yes, the world changes dramatically with technology, and it'll probably be very different in 5 or 10 years from now. But I don't see a scenario in which human connection doesn't continue to be really important in whatever we do professionally. And so I think if we can remember that and focus on that, and not in a holier than thou kind of way, but sometimes it's like, oh, these kids these days, they don't know how to make eye contact and communicate. And what's wrong? Okay, maybe there's some truth to that. And maybe they've spent more time in front of screens than some of us who are a little older. But like, isn't part of our job to do some mentoring
Totally.
and bring that wisdom? And then also, like, again, so I always say to people without minimizing whatever challenge they're facing, and I try to remind myself of this when I'm dealing with something really challenging, is like, we've all made it through 100% of the challenges we've ever faced up to this point, if we're still here. So that means
Yeah.
we're actually quite resilient. We just don't often give ourselves enough credit for how resilient we are.
Good way for us to segue to the next hot take. And emotional intelligence, it seems to me, is one of, if not your best, competitive advantages, right? I mean, there was a Gartner study in 2025 showing trends with current workforce ecosystems. AI is going to handle a lot more technical tasks, very
Yep.
tactical, transactional things. But organizations really still desperately need emotional intelligence. So, will EQ be the only thing separating great leaders from obsolete ones that are really only focused on, adapting to technology right now, and that's the key strategy?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, I'm biased in this regard. I've thought for years that emotional intelligence is a key differentiator. I think it's going to become more so, like what I was just saying, like prioritizing human connection. Because you think of EQ, what is it really? It's self-awareness and self-management, right? So a lot of what you and I were talking about too is like, how do I manage myself? How do I deal with the different stress, emotions, challenge, overwhelm, everything that's coming up? And then it's about social awareness and relationship management. Now, look, the tools that we all use to manage our day-to-day lives and work, as well as to communicate with other humans, have changed significantly over the last several years. I sometimes, again, think about, my dad died in 2001. And I sometimes think if he came back today and I handed him my iPhone, or I showed him that, like, hey, Dad, I'm doing a podcast interview.
Yeah.
My dad was in radio, actually, and I tried to explain to him what a podcast was. My dad's head would explode, right?
Right.
He'd be like, what are you talking about? And I'd say, yeah, no, basically almost everybody these days now has their own in-home studio where they're
True.
creating video and audio content and broadcasting it to the world through social media. And he'd be like, I mean, it would literally be like I was speaking Greek. Do you know what I mean? A language he'd never heard. So I say all of that because at the end of the day, though, yes, we have to utilize the technology and the tools, but it still comes down to self awareness and self management, and then social awareness and relationship management. And again, if we think about AI agents and all of these technology platforms and robots or whatever's all
Totally.
coming, going to be handling different things that we don't have to handle anymore, what they're not going to handle is our self awareness and our self management and our social awareness and our relationship management. They can't do that. That's not what they're built for. Even if they can help us write emails or, you know, manage spreadsheets or create content, they can't actually manage the relationships. That's a human phenomenon. And so the more we can realize that, remember that, and continue to develop those skills, the better we're going to be.
I found it very interesting in playing with AI. It always seems to me that it's trying to make you feel happy, and great idea, great suggestion, Mike. Like, oh, that changes everything, Mike. And it just
Right.
seems like it's kind of its own little echo chamber, and I think helpful for generating ideas and, to your point, email and things like that. But the complexity of dealing with we're emotional people, right? And
Yeah.
dealing with that, I don't think that that is going to solve a lot of those problems. And the data is pretty clear, right? I mean, higher level of EQ in organizations makes those organizations more successful and profitable.
Totally. Look, I mean, I have ongoing conversations with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating. I find it helpful and supportive and interesting and all the things. I've never had, as kind as it might try to be in the language, it can't give me a hug. It can't put its arm around me or take me out for a
Digital
beer.
high
You know what I
five,
mean? Like,
digital beer.
yeah, we can't go on a hike together. I mean, I can be talking back and forth on my, but you know what I mean? At the end of the day, there is that part of it. And I don't mean to get weird about it, but it's like we need other humans. There's nothing quite like being in a room with other human beings, making eye contact with each other, having real live conversations, whether we're talking about solving business problems, whether we're talking about just emotional connection and empathy for each other. I mean, I get advice from AI, which I appreciate, medical advice, parenting advice, business advice. We're just, we need a new hot water heater in our house.
Yeah,
I've got a lot of really good
everything.
information. It's like, but at the end of the day, it can't come and put in the hot water heater. Like I got to talk to the guys that come out and negotiate the price and figure out how we're going to navigate it and get a couple different estimates. Like all of that comes into human interaction, and again, leadership is really about that. And if AI can help automate some things that we're doing or take some busy work off our plate, great. But at the end of the day, a leader's job is first and foremost to manage his or her people effectively and connect with the real humans that work with him or her. Again, I think sometimes we get so busy and caught up in all the things, we forget, oh, that is my job, is to actually listen to people and talk to people and connect with them, human being to human being.
It's really interesting. I think this is a good way for us to pivot to another hot take. AI is great at giving you recognition. And like, if I need a shout out, I just launch Claude or chat and I'm like, if I need to feel good pretty quick, it'll
Yep.
do that. And I
Yep.
think it maybe underscores where if you're in the middle of your workday and you're dealing with some issue and you launch chat to get like that recognition or that support, I think it underscores that there's something broken with some of these programs that companies have, right? Especially with regards to recognition.
Yep.
And I'm curious, your take on this hot take. Recognition programs are expensive lies we tell each other, right? And tell ourselves, right? I think some of the research showing that most employees, I think it's only 31% of employees think that recognition programs work at their organizations, but 94% of companies have these in place. And you see
Yeah.
people going to chat, going to Claude to get recognition from them and say, look at all the work I've been doing. Am I crazy here? Like, is this actually good work? So I'm curious your take on what you've seen in the consulting and the coaching you've done with organizations centered around recognition, because it's so important.
Well, look, I mean, recognition is important, and I think it is important that those 94% of those companies have those recognition programs, and the 6% that don't probably should work on some aspect of it. The feedback, though, that like 30 some percent of people say they think they work is because they're not always effective in the way that they're set up, and not everybody gets recognized because we can't. Like if everybody gets a trophy, the trophy doesn't mean anything. So we have to be thoughtful and deliberate about who gets recognized, how they get recognized, what they get recognized for. In my work and in my research around recognition and appreciation over the years, what I've learned is there's an important, subtle but significant distinction between recognition and appreciation.
Mm.
So recognition is about outcome, performance, results. It's some, right? I mean, even when you get it anecdotally from someone or from chat or from Claude, it's like, hey, what about this? Or what did, oh, great job, way to go. It's basically reacting to you did something. I could just say, hey, thanks so much, Andrew. I appreciated that. Or that was a great presentation. Or thanks for dropping by, and or sending me that email or sending me that link or whatever. It's reacting to something. Appreciation is really more about valuing people, caring about people. So recognition is about performance, appreciation is about people. Recognition is conditional. You have to do something to warrant it, which is fine. But appreciation, it has a little more unconditionality to it. It's more about, again, caring about someone. So like we could recognize somebody's contribution to something or a project or an outcome or a result, but we can then appreciate and value, like, what's the quality of that person? I really value this person's stick-to-itiveness or thoughtfulness or kindness or whatever, and letting someone know the impact they have on you. Again, back to emotional intelligence and vulnerability. It's actually vulnerable to express authentically to someone what you appreciate about them. Sometimes just acknowledging, wow, that sounds really hard, or it sounds like you're really stressed or you've been working a lot. Just that, the acknowledgement of somebody's hard work or difficulty, that's appreciating, wow, that sucks. You know what I mean? And that
Right.
almost seems more negative, but it's actually just an acknowledgement of like, wow, you've been working really hard, or that must be really disappointing or whatever. So it's about showing up and meeting people where they are and being present, as opposed to simply just rah, rah, great job, way to go.
How are CEOs, the CEOs that you are dealing with that are so heads down, right? What advice would you give to them in being a greater steward for not only greater recognition, but appreciation for the entire organization? Because I think it really is a downstream effect. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of executives are so narrowed in on specific business outcomes. But how would you advise some of these CEOs and other business leaders?
Well, well, I think the first thing is just to understand that distinction. So again, recognize people, the company when it's warranted. Again, if you get up and say, everybody, great job when we didn't really do a great job, or the quarterly results are down or business is struggling, like you got to tell the truth, because people don't trust you if you sugarcoat things or try to make it sound better than it is, right? However, again, appreciation is important and necessary all the time. So valuing people, caring about people, being grateful. Sometimes when I'm talking to a CEO or his or her executive leadership team, we'll have a discussion about, like, what are you grateful for personally? What are you grateful for right now about the company? And again,
Mm.
this is not some we're awesome, everything's great, but what are you grateful for? Who inside the company are you aware of that these people's contributions are so fundamental, like we would not be here without them? And do we make sure we let them know? You know what I mean? And everybody on the team, if people aren't bringing value to the team in some way, why are they on the team? And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that everybody has to be performing at a really high level all the time. Sometimes people are struggling, but again, we need to be able to value people as humans, and everyone's busy. And like CEOs and senior leaders and board members and people, they're busy. They have a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress. They're oriented, understandably, like most of us, around what's wrong or what needs to be fixed or where are their gaps or where are their vulnerabilities, the negative kind that we're worried about that could potentially bring things down. But taking some time to take some inventory of what's going well and making sure that we're letting people know that we care about them and we value them, that goes a long way.
As we get close to the end of our conversation, Mike, if an executive walked away from our chat today with just one mindset shift that could help transform their own leadership, their own organizations, what would that be? What would that mindset shift be?
This might sound a little strange and simple and almost counterintuitive, but I would say start asking for help more often. Because what I find is that most of us love to help people, but very few of us are comfortable asking for help. And if you're a senior leader, you're in a leadership position, if you start asking for help, it's a practical manifestation of vulnerability and authentic leadership, as we've been talking about. What you do, it is vulnerable to ask because people might judge you or reject you or somehow get weird about it, but you'll start getting more help, number one. Number two, you'll model that for other people. Oh, he asked for help. She asked for help. I guess we can ask for help. And the third thing that we forget about asking for help is that we unlock other people's potential. It's a recognition of, I trust you enough to ask you for help. I think you could help me. And then if you do help me, not only do I get some help, but I just gave you the opportunity to do something that most people love to do, which is what? Help. It creates a culture of generosity. But a lot of senior leaders that I work with don't want to ask for help. They don't want to burden people. They don't want to seem like they can't do everything themselves. There's a bunch of reasons. But if we can get past that, there's so much positive potential, not just for us selfishly to get some help, which is nice, but actually to really empower the people around us and set that as a cultural norm.
I've seen that play out in a very real way. I have a 2-year-old, and he has these temper tantrums, right? I found it really interesting when I ask him and I say, "Can you help Dada?" All of a sudden, it's like we're wired to help. And I think you're dead on. We would do well to have executives would do well to take that advice in looking for help and being open to a feedback loop. Because I think a lot of times the feedback loop is non-existent.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's a huge piece. So a couple of other things just to quickly go over here, Mike. Where can people
Nice.
connect with you and find out more information about what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on all the social platforms. Pretty active on LinkedIn. You can just search for Mike Robbins. But our website, mike-robbins.com, is probably the best place to go. You know, I do my podcast every week. No, don't have any books in the works at the moment, although I'm sure I'll have a new one in the next year or two as the world keeps evolving. But just grateful to be doing work that I love and getting to travel around the country and speak to lots of teams and leaders. So it's still a lot of fun for me all these years into it.
You were like Nostradamus with putting the book out right before COVID and
Yeah,
very timely. So I'll be waiting with bated breath on your next release, Mike. And
thank you.
really great chatting with you, and looking forward to continuing our conversations in the future. And thanks so much again for joining us here on Talent Take Five. So till next time, folks, I'm Andrew Sterling, your host, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.